started, we want to make sure that we're sticking as closely to the time as we possibly can. So if there's some people coming in, or if you're getting some coffee or whatever, I completely understand. My name is Dr. Jeremy Norwood. I'm an associate professor of sociology here at Spring Arbor University. And I just wanted to take a few moments to welcome you to our 4th annual Spring Arbor University Conference on Human Trafficking. We're very thankful to have you all here. We've got a number of students. We've got a lot of community members. We've got a lot of helping professionals that are here, social workers, counselors, other healthcare professionals, and we're so thankful to be able to have you here today. Not that I like rain, but I kind of prefer it when we have something like this, so you're not looking outside at the beautiful weather and hoping that, well, when does this thing get over? So I appreciate it. First of all, I want to thank everyone that could make this possible. Hannah Shemanek and Jenna Speck and Allie Taylor, Lainey Bloom, Tim Babcock's back here. A number of these folks have put in a ton of hours. Also, the students from Mary Darling's comm class, we really appreciate all of your work. We honestly couldn't do this without the type of student support that we get. And anyone that I've forgotten to mention, that's completely on me. I apologize, but I appreciate all of your help. This also with the AV team, Sherry Mayotte, Tony Mayotte are back there for the coffee and the donuts. Thank you guys. The AV team is back here helping out. We've had a lot of support from custodial and everybody on campus, and it truly takes everyone to make something like this happen. I also want to take a moment just to introduce our vendors in case you have not met them yet. But Matt Osborne is over here at the set free table. Thanks, Matt. Jennifer Fuller is here from Flourish. Okay. Becca Zranick and Adelie Schwartz are here from Better Way Imports. And then over here is Julie Loudon from the Cross Cultural Studies office. They're selling fair trade jewelry. Tim Babcock's over here selling, yes, you guessed it, free trade chocolate. So, I know everybody's interested. Where's the fair trade chocolate? Where's that? Fair trade. So anyway, all of that to say, I just want to introduce everyone to that in your folders, okay? We've got a folder full of resources and information. On the left side of the folder is, I don't know how many of these you've been to or conferences like this. Sometimes I go to these and there's so much going on and I take it all in, and then I leave and it's like, okay, so what do I do now, right? What are some different things that I can sort of follow up with or things like that? We just didn't want this to be something that you just sort of left and you got this done and so on and so forth. And so we put together this packet of resources. There are a number of things from Polaris Project, which is one of the national authorities on human trafficking, University of Michigan Human Trafficking Law Clinic, the Hope Project. There's other resources for you to read about, farm worker legal services and so on and so forth. That's all on the left side. On the right side, you have a copy of the program, which goes through the itinerary, lets you know where the workshops will be, where to go from after the keynotes are done, where do we go next, and where's lunch, and all that kind of stuff. Which isn't extremely relevant now, but give ourselves a couple of hours and we'll want to know where that is. So Qdoba is going to cater that, so that'll be after the first workshop in the polling center. And so you've got that, and then you've also got a survey in there. So we really, really value your feedback. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we'll start getting together and planning for next year's, and we'll want to look at that feedback. So at the end of the day today, about 4:15 or so, you have about 5, 10, 15 minutes to be able to fill that out. I just want to let you know where that is, okay? So you've got all that, and you're ready to go. Now, if you have any other questions or things like that, look for some of the young ladies that have been at the table, or anybody with one of those human trafficking shirts should be able to help you out. So if you have any questions, myself, any of them, we should be able to help, okay? Now I want to take a moment just to transition and introduce a colleague of mine for the last several years, Dr. John Hawthorne, who despite the fact that he's been putting in hours and hours and hours on end to get us ready for the HLC, the Higher Learning Commission accreditation, he's here to share a little bit more about the history of this and the student involvement and the campus buy-in and some of those things. So will you join me in welcoming Dr. John Hawthorne?
Well, on behalf of my colleagues at the university, speaking, I guess, I have a microphone, so speaking on behalf of the administration, we don't know about me. I'm not in the administration, actually. Although he's right, I have been focusing on issues that are, it's not a big problem, it's just a big project. That every 10 years we go through a regional accrediting visit, and ours is in December, and the report is somewhere between what I thought was done and what after the last meeting I have to go back and work on. So, but that's been very good. And I'm very excited about it. Just to let you know, it's a great story. If you don't know Spring Arbor well, it's just, I could go on and on about what's in this report and what we know about ourselves, what we've learned about ourselves during this process. So I'd be glad to tell you more about that. But I'm here to talk about human trafficking. And kind of my interest, engagement, kind of what's happened to me. Jeremy says that we've been colleagues since 2011. That means that I've been part of all of these conferences, but it also means that I've learned a great deal from him. He may tell you this in his presentation, he probably won't. So I will tell you that he is in very high demand and has been doing workshops all over this part of the state in terms of assisting various kinds of agencies and professions to see the signs of human trafficking and know what to do about it. So this is a passion of his. It's also an academic interest of his. He might talk about his dissertation if you're really lucky, which was related to the topic as well. My learning about human trafficking didn't come just from Jeremy, though. It came from these students, from the students who organize, who are the backbone of the planning for this conference every year, but also the work that they do, the passion that our students, they're not just, many of them are, when I say our students, many of them really are our students in the Department of Sociology, Global Studies, and Criminal Justice. But there are a lot of other students who major in other things who are part of this passionate enterprise at Spring Arbor University. And for many of our students, and by our this time I mean our department students, they have done some remarkable work. I can think of 5 senior projects I've had the pleasure of sitting in as a reader on, of people who have looked at in-depth work to try to understand dynamics, ranging from looking at traffic patterns literally around massage parlors to 3 students who, bless their hearts, studied Backpage every day for 6 months. Backpage in adult, I mean, where you find people who are likely to be looking, I mean, I didn't have to do, I was glad I didn't have to do that, but to see some of these folks who did this, delightful young Christian women who spend their spare hours looking at these websites and hoping they're not on the wrong side of the firewall from the university. They care about this topic, and they go on to work on this topic. Some of those people who've done senior projects are now in law school. A couple are out, right? Who are continuing to pursue this topic. Another couple, at least one, recent graduate is now studying international relations in graduate school, again, because this is a topic area. But these students don't sort of learn about human trafficking here and then say, oh, I didn't know that, this is something I read. One of the surprising things for me is our students, the students who are involved in this, they were well attuned on this issue before they came here. They come here and they say, what are we going to do about human trafficking? How can we make a difference? And a speech I give all the time, one of the things I love about this generation compared to my generation is my generation makes lists of why the things I want to tackle are really hard and what would have to fall in place for us to make a difference. They don't do that, they just act. Mostly that scares me. A little bit it scares me. Mostly it just engenders admiration. So all these folks back here in the back who've helped organize, a couple of our graduates who are here who've been part of that, this is part of the passion of what we do here. Because I've been working on this report, I know very well that there is this thing we call the concept, which is the guiding mission of the university, that we are a community of learners dedicated to the study and application of the liberal arts, who see our dedication to Jesus Christ as the perspective for learning, in order that we will develop critical participants in the contemporary world. All of the first three things, the community of learners and the study and application of a variety of perspectives and the passion for being disciples of Jesus Christ, all lead them to wanting to change the world they live in. And that's actually kind of what we're doing here today. So thank you for being here. We're glad you're part of this presentation and looking forward to what's going to happen with the remainder of the day and what it's going to do for you beyond this, how we will work together beyond this day. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Dr. Brian Kono from Department of Religion and Ministry, and the acting director, coordinator, guru of chapel services here at Spring Arbor, who will bring our invocation.
I always wanted the title of guru.
And I hate to interrupt the guru for just a quick second, but if we could scoot in a little bit, we've got some people that are waiting for places to sit, so if we could scoot in just a little bit, and then we can make some room and people can sit down if they want to. If not, then they can stand. It's completely up to you. Now back to the guru. Here we go. Thanks, Brian. Front row's always available. Yeah.
This one is empty. We've got plenty of seats over here.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
So if you've been around this topic very long, you can't, I don't think you can deny that there are times when it seems there is a different power or some other power at work, of a power of oppression at work, that the human spirit seems to join with in oppressing other people. And as a Christian university, we believe that there is another power at work against that, trying to help others be free from this issue in the world, from the oppression like this in the world. And so this morning, as we deal with the issues, as we talk about the issues, as we hear what's happening around the state and around the world in regards to the issue of human trafficking, as a Christian university, we want to take a moment to ask for help from something outside of us, what we believe is the God of the universe. And so I'd like to begin just with maybe a moment of silence, and in the midst of the craziness of the week and maybe even the craziness of the morning trying to get here, in our hearts and in our minds there's a sediment that often gets kind of stirred up. And in order to address this topic, I think it's good for us to have clear hearts, clear minds, and even a clear soul. So I'm just going to ask us to quiet our hearts and minds and be silent for just a minute before I pray. Gracious God, God who stands above all things, God who is the source of all wisdom, the God who is the source of justice, God who is the source of strength to help overcome the evil and the powers who work against the flourishing of the human spirit. God, we come before you now. And in this moment and through this day, we ask that you would unify our hearts and our efforts. Help us to reflect on our own lives, that we may understand how we can be with human flourishing, with the redemption of this world with the power that is freeing people from slavery to others and slavery to themselves, slavery to brokenness, slavery to institutions. And God, we would ask that you might empower us to be influencers in our sphere of relationships within our world, whether that's just in one neighborhood, in Jackson, in Grand Rapids, in Detroit, one small neighborhood in the middle of Michigan, or whether it's that you take us to a neighborhood somewhere around the world. Help us to be for justice and for freedom. Give us discernment to know how we can take what we learned today to make choices in our daily lives. Choices that help others. Choices that work against the institutional enslavement of others. The choices that work for making this world a better place, where every person has dignity, where every person can exercise freedoms with responsibility. And for those who may choose it, every person may find a right relationship with you, the God who holds all of us together, the God who desires harmony for the people on this planet, the God who would help every one of us flourish in life and become what you have called us to be. So empower us, fill us this day. Give us your wisdom. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Now I'd like to introduce Representative Brana Kali, State Representative and House of Representatives. She's going to give us an update on what's happening in Michigan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for that beautiful prayer. And thank you for pronouncing my last name right. It's Kahle, so I answered almost anything, but it's Kali, like a collie dog. But I just want to say thank you to Dr. Jeremy Norwood for putting all of this together along with a large team. I know there's a lot that goes into it, and it comes from a sincere passion for helping victims of human trafficking. If you know him, you know how true that is. This is an issue that is dear to me, not with direct involvement or engagement, but through my children and a cousin of mine. I have a 24-year-old son, a 21-year-old daughter, 24-year-old daughter-in-law. So if you're a student here at Spring Arbor, I could be your mom very easily. They went to Liberty, and this issue is something that they have had a passion for. And I have a cousin. She actually lives in Maryland, but she's taken several trips to India, believe it or not, over there to with a missionary organization to help children that were the children of human trafficking victims and help restore them and give them a chance at a whole and normal life. So now I am the state representative for Lenawee County. If you're not from this area, that's adjacent to where we are now. Less than an hour from here is my home. And want to provide you with a brief update from a state perspective, just give you an overview. It might be familiar to some of you, might be brand new to some of you, then give you a historical and legislative background, and then just a little glimpse at where we're going next and what the focus is from the state of Michigan at the state level. So first we'll just give a little brief overview. Might be a refresher, as I said, or it might be new information, but the definition, you know this. Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery. And usually when it's talked about, it could be broken into two different categories. You would have the labor trafficking or the sex trafficking. And that's defined as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by improper means. Improper means is a very fancy way of just saying by force or by fraud, tricking them in other words, or coercion, forcing them, coercion, for an improper purpose like forced labor or sexual exploitation. So that's kind of the state definition of human trafficking, and I think it's a common definition. Sex trafficking cases are the most prevalent type, that's the most common, and traffickers use websites like Backpage.com, you know, like think of a Craigslist for the black market, and that's how they solicit purchasers. Victims, on the other hand, commonly get involved because you think, how can this be happening in our backyard? We know Jackson, it's very, very common. How does this happen? A lot of times it's voluntary. That's what the state has seen through their research at first. Like they might believe a pimp is their boyfriend, something like that. But then they're forced to prostitute themselves through, and that starts a vicious cycle. Could be through drugs or emotional abuse or fear. If someone's not a legal citizen of the United States, it could be fear. They might use that, hey, we're going to report you to immigration services. All sorts of things are used to keep them in that horrible lifestyle. And they don't have any control. Trafficking, again, you might know this, but it's the second largest and fastest growing criminal industry in the world. After drugs. Drugs is first. While accurate and comprehensive data isn't readily available, and I had a great conversation with Dr. Norwood about this fact, that it's difficult to get accurate numbers. It really is. Some of this is hidden. We can't find it. And that is that underreporting. But some sources have helped shed some light on the scope and size of this problem. So according to the Department of Justice, there were 2,515 incidents of human trafficking in the United States. This is how old this particular statistic is, between 2008 and 2010. It's pretty old, that's a lot. That's in the United States. The FBI worked 220 sex trafficking cases alone in Michigan in 2015. That's more recent. Right here in Michigan, 220 sex trafficking cases that involve the FBI. And their data from the FBI shows that it occurs in cities like Detroit and Lansing. We might assume that, some of our bigger cities, but it's also in small towns like Mason. And it could be in your small town. I'm from a small town, Adrian. In 2016, the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, which provides a nationwide hotline for victims and for others to report incidents, which is good, there's somewhere victims can go, they found that 7,500 trafficking cases were reported nationwide, and here's the staggering statistic, this was last year, up 5,526 from the previous year. So the good news is people are reaching out for help. The bad news is that's a massive increase in numbers. Of these 7,500 cases in 2016, 249 came from Michigan, where the center received 843 calls from our state. 195 of these cases involved sex trafficking, while at least 29 involved labor trafficking in Michigan. That, I didn't realize that part. 219 were females, 29 were males. 95 cases involved minors, and that is sad. So far this year, in 2017, the center has found that 136 cases have been reported, and it has received 470 calls for help. So since 2007, this same center has received from Michigan 3,705 calls and 94 cases in our state. You know, so that this is helping us right here, and that's a lot. Every one of those numbers are a person. You know, that's why you're here. It's about people. So that's just kind of an overview. That's what the state has for their numbers and their records and what they think about. So then we'll switch to the second piece of this, and that's a historical and a legislative background. Because this is newer, in a sense, when you think about government and that sort of thing. So law enforcement's focus on trafficking started from a crackdown on child pornography back in the early 90s. That was a big deal. But the first federal trafficking law, the very first one ever, passed in 2000. What followed after that was a national shift from viewing prostitutes as criminals who need to be in jail. This is important, and this has been some of the work I've been doing. But we don't view them as criminals, the prostitutes that just need to go to jail, but sometimes in viewing them as victims because of the force, the fraud, the abuse, the fear that's used to keep them in that lifestyle. And it's important that government recognize that fact and that the courts recognize that fact so that we can help these folks. In Michigan, the first human trafficking laws were passed. Does anybody know? Just curious. 2006. So that's how long Michigan has been in this fight, officially from a legislative level. These laws they're actually very poorly drafted, and they had a lot of loopholes in them. There were problems that actually some were made worse because of those laws that weren't well done, and that were exacerbated with the rise of trafficking in Michigan. It was good that Michigan was doing something, but laws need to be done well and based on facts and research and how do you help people. So in 2013, Attorney General Schuette launched the first Michigan Commission on Human Trafficking. And that whole commission, it was a good group of people at the table. It was lawmakers, it was government officials, it was law enforcement, and practitioners, people on the ground. People, if you're in social work, if you're engaged in this, there was that, some of you would have been at the table that served the way you do. This report found, so this was 2013, pretty recent, a significant lack of quality Michigan-specific human trafficking data, and Dr. Norwood knows this well. It also found significant gaps in the framework for trafficking victim services. There was a lot of holes in how do we help these victims. And then finally, our anti-trafficking laws were pretty weak. So that was 2013. So after that, the Commission's 2013 report resulted in a large package of legislative reforms that came through in 2014. All this is new. This is good stuff. And they significantly strengthened the anti-trafficking laws. And here's some of the things that happened. If you're engaged in this regularly, you might already know. But one, it's a big one, safe harbor protection for minors. That was very big, because they're young, trapped in that for a number of reasons. You don't want to throw them in the prison system for the rest of their lives. So safe harbor protection. There's a rebuttable presumption that any minor charged with prostitution in Michigan is a victim. Now that can be proven differently within the court, there's still that there, but that's the beginning assumption, that if you're a minor, you're a victim, and that's very key. Secondly, there's one for addressing the need to reduce demand for sex trafficking. People buying it. Who's doing this? Who's going out and paying for this? And so this legislation added, they're called Johns, right? Convicted of soliciting minor prostitutes to the sex offender registry. Public shaming does work. Studies have shown in this type of arena. And then increasing the statute of limitations from 6 years to 25 years. So if you're young and you've been afraid to speak out, you have a longer time to come back. There's several more. I don't want to bore you with that. I'm trying to be mindful of the time. I'm happy to leave some cards and you can get the list of what happened in 2014, but I'm going to scoot ahead. The 2014, but here was the most important piece of that legislation, in addition to the minor safe harbor protection for minor, in my opinion, but it created a permanent human trafficking commission within the Attorney General's office, not temporary. So that's a big deal. Things are changing all the time. New things are happening, new methods. It's growing. So there's now a permanent human trafficking commission in Michigan that's under the umbrella of the Attorney General's office. So I'm going to jump ahead again. By the way, the current budget gives $390,000 to that commission, so that there's money that helps support that. 2016, there were additional reforms that criminalized sex tourism, which is the sale of travel services to countries where prostitution is legal. I don't know if you knew sex tourism existed, but it does. Where you craft a trip, where you could go to another country, where that is legal. That's now against the law in Michigan. Expanded safe harbor law protections for minors again, and increased the penalty for sex trafficking crimes to a 15-year felony. I know it needs to be taken seriously, so stronger punishment. And then finally, I don't know if you attended this, Dr. Norwood, but in 2016, the commission held the first statewide conference on human trafficking, and there were over 200 in attendance. I think you said you had 150 registered today, so Congrats. When you think the first state one had 200 and you've got 150 or so here, it's good. It also shows how many people care and are aware of this. This year, in 2017, I was honored to introduce a bill that did become law in the spring, and that was one that would expand the safe harbor law to all victims of human trafficking, not just minors. You know, you could be older and be a victim. And this would give everyone that's been in human trafficking the opportunity to escape this heinous crime, and again, not just be treated like a criminal, thrown in the prison system, and then that starts that endless cycle. This is a chance for them to get a hand up and a way out of that lifestyle. You know, the premise there is that they've already suffered enough. You know, we shouldn't punish them further for being a victim, regardless of your age. And prison's not the best place for victims of human trafficking. We need to make them eligible for probation, where they can get the counseling they may need, and maybe that's part of your job. I'm not sure if you're here today. And the judge still they retain that discretion, you know, to make that final determination, are they a victim or are they doing this voluntarily? You know, that does still happen. So that was the most recent law. In fact, that was the only one in 2017 in Michigan that further addresses all of this. So just to close, is where are we going now? Where's the state of Michigan now going forward? And one of the priorities of the Attorney General's Human Trafficking Commission now, and I spoke to a member last week, you know, saying, where are we going forward? What can we expect next? And that will be a survey project aimed at law enforcement to help determine the true prevalence of human trafficking in Michigan. You know, what's out there, how many, and try to gauge that. That's a hole that we haven't been able to address properly. That's one of their top priorities. And then also along with that, increasing human trafficking awareness statewide. You're very well aware of it, but not everyone is, believe it or not. As much as it's out there, as much as it's in our conversations and in the news, there's still a lot of people who think, yeah, that happens in Detroit. You know, they don't realize, no, that happens in small towns all across Michigan and all across the country. So that's the other part of that initiative. So they want a survey project to see how prevalent it is in Michigan, increase awareness. But the biggest issue to address moving forward is to address the commercial demand for this, which is pretty sad. So they're working on the state police. You may or may not know this right now. They're currently working with the commission on a, quote, buyer beware project. And it's called Buyer Beware. It focuses on internet advertising and awareness. And then other things, again, will be this John's Registry. That's what it's kind of informally called, the John's Registry. You know, if you've been out there buying these services, being a purchaser, you're called a John, making that list more public. And it is controversial because some people say that is a violation of privacy, et cetera, et cetera. No, you know, we have it for other things. So that's another a top initiative. And I got, speaking to a commission member, he said it's amazing how that works. And it's amazing who's buying the services. You know, it might be the husband of a nice family, and they do not want their name on that registry. So that's what we can expect going forward. So if you have things that come to your mind, you're a state representative. I'm assuming you're from Michigan if you're here. You can find out who your state representative is. And if you're working there, you're trying your best to know what's really happening. But if you see things that your representative may not see or may not know, it really does make a difference when you call or email. It makes a difference for me. No one can be an expert in everything. And so I like to hear from people in my area, Lenawee County, so that I know what's going on. Otherwise, how do we know? So if you notice something, if you have an idea, especially if you're working in the field, do it. Call or email. They do get it. They do usually listen. So thank you. Thanks, Dr. Miller.
Okay, I'm going to transition here for a minute and welcome Aaron Zuraic. Aaron, Aaron is a student here, and got to know him a little bit during our time attending Westwinds Community Church on the west side of Jackson. And Aaron gave this spoken word performance in church that was just absolutely lights out. I was very, very moved by it. I do need to warn you, however, he's done this at one of our previous conferences. I do need to warn you though, it's powerful, and it's going to be very, there are times when he's going to be very much into the character itself. And so I just want to let you know that if you need to step out for a moment or whatever, we completely understand that. It's going to be the same way later for Leslie King's keynote. But we're not here to sort of shield ourselves from what goes on, but to better understand and sort of feel a little bit more about what this must be like to go through. Obviously, we can't do that perfectly, but this is here to give you a better idea of what it's like to be a victim of human trafficking. So I want to just take a moment, introduce Aaron, and just give you that heads up right off the bat, okay? Thank you.
Are we on? Yes, we are. Let's move this up. Actually, let's keep it down. I might be getting a little loud, so just want to warn you ahead of time. As you said, I was a student here in 2010. Was actually my first year. Jeremy was actually one of my freshman year professors, and I took modern social problems with him, so this topic came up very frequently. And the first time I heard this piece I'm about to perform to you, I didn't write it. But I think I was sitting on a bus or going on the way to some Spring Arbor University sponsored event, and I was almost in tears when I heard it. So it weighs very heavily on me, and I hope it, in some sense, does the same for you. She had a stained glass window for a heart, a suitbox for a chest cavity, and a kaleidoscope for a soul that would reflect its light back at me. Depending upon the day, she shone different colors. She had a handful of favorites she kept locked inside her cupboards, and she's got drawers in her stomach. Knows how to swallow her pride, but it gets compartmentalized in the crawl spaces and builds up inside. She says she's fine, but she lies. She wears sunglasses all the time to hide her eyes, and at night, she stays out of the shadows. It's one of the only times her true color shines, and she says, yeah, you're talking about me like you know what I mean, but you know nothing. Nothing at all about what it means to lead this kind of life. Baby doll, my heart is as black as my lungs are. I keep bitterness in these cabinets next to all of my bad habits. You either find faith or you lose it. You either had it or you have it. Well, I have had it! So I wear my smiles on the good days that I keep inside these baskets where my grimmest face in life without the opiate for the masses. You pop your God! Like these pills that I take to bear those circumstances. What's the difference? I call out to your God, but he never listens. You call it praying? Yeah, well, I'm just wishing things would have been different. She says her daddy didn't want her, so she squanders to be the mother-father figure for her daughter, a piece of clay, recreating herself as this beautiful basin from the situation she's been placed in, built for retaining life, a feet manufactured without the proper water or a potter, and her heart, it cuts like a knife. It's priceless, and it's as hard as diamonds, but she's been selling it for nickels. Everybody's been buying. So now there's cracks in the basement. The way there's cracks in the basin, the way there's cracks in that cement that she can dig her high heels in, the place where Daddy used to beat her when she dared to face him. The way there's cracks in that cement that she can dig her high heels in while she waits for another customer to come and pour his water. She says her mother was a little crazy, a little lazy, a little biased towards the media mainstream, prone to feigning or naming it fame when she'd pass out from blazing just after Papa came home late for the hazing. The alcohol made him crazy! That's when I started praying, but once, change him. So that's when I started blaming. We're all on our own, and there's nothing in those stars, and there's no hand out there to save me. So could you save me? She loved Vogue, an American teen magazine, almost as much as she loved vomiting. Tried to match the model women she'd see on the movie screens, and she says, I believe that she loves me, and maybe it's a fantasy, but I believe she cared for me the way she cared for her methamphetamines. Don't tell me I'm insane! You point those fingers so righteously! All of these people pushing me to practice their piety. Well, I think you got a chance to save me, so thank you kindly, greatly, but it's just me and my baby! Me and my little girl! Us against the world, so sweet dreams, daughter! I'm gonna be your mother! I'm gonna be your father. So every time another man like her father bought her, she spent those nickels on diamonds for her daughter. She had prisms for eyes, and one time she took off her mask and she let me inside. I paid her for her time. I told her she was valuable, and she replied, yeah, I'm just about as valuable as the next man in line. But no, girl, I think you're more than that. I think that you are beautiful. And I think that you are lovely. I think you're made for more than you settled for. And she says, all of them. Every single one of them tell me they love me! I used to dream, and I used to have big plans, and I used to believe that there was somebody out there who was bigger than me, and that he could take care of me, and I could be whatever I wanted to be. But I guess it's too late for me. So I started selling my dignity to give my daughter that dream, and to make it a reality. I used to dream! I never meant to quit! Who's to blame for this bull? Girl, I will not even mention it. Look, the cards that were dealt, I don't understand. And I do not have all the answers, and I do not know all the plans. But I just came here to tell you that you are beautiful. And I think that you are lovely. And I think I know a love that loves the unloving. And she told me, you said your God was gorgeous, but I just can't see it. I want so badly to see color. I want so badly to believe it. I keep an ounce of hope inside a dresser drawer in my chest. And every once and now and then, it grows, if watered, to a seedling at best. But I just can't make it blossom. Because I just can't make myself forget. She's got a kaleidoscope soul, but she's got grayscale lenses. She's got wrought iron bars that keep up her defenses. She's got all of her emotions hung up on hooks in her closets, and she keeps little hints of happiness tucked away in her pockets. She's got angels singing to her from ballerinas in a music box that's locked behind a door that's cemented to a heart of rocks. But they say if you knock long enough, that door can be opened. So here's to hope! And until then, I just wanted you to know that you are beautiful. And I think that you're lovely. I think you're made more than you settled for. And she says, no, everyone will tell they love me. No, girl, I think you're gorgeous. And I swear that it's true. I swear that there is more hope out there for you. Thank you.
Couple of quick things before we get started with this. First of all, thank you to everyone. For John for your introduction. Brian, thanks so much for your opening prayer. Representative Colley for her remarks from the state on what the state is working on with regard to human trafficking. And then Aaron, it's powerful every time we hear it. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. First of all, Melinda Vocal, where'd she go? Over here? She's not gonna raise her hand. Oh. So before the first human trafficking conference we had here, somebody whispered in my ear and said, hey, one of the board members is gonna come. They're really interested in this issue and so on and so forth. My initial response was, oh no. I'm gonna be in trouble. And then I got to know Melinda, who's been one of our strongest supporters over the years. She's not going to stand up. She doesn't want any recognition. In fact, she's going to be angry that I even mentioned this. But I've been very, very much, she, with other people, have really been the wind in our sails and helping to support some of these things. And I can't share enough the sense of hope and even being able to sit down or on the phone, be able to talk through some different things in terms of where we're moving as a university with regard to this. So I really appreciate her very much, Melinda. Thanks so much. Drove 2 hours this morning. Thanks so much. There are other folks here too. I appreciate your support. You've been with us from the beginning. I just had to mention Melinda. The other thing to keep in mind today, a couple of times a year the FBI runs what's called Operation Cross Country, okay, where they do a number of different anti-trafficking operations across the state. One of the reasons we couldn't get a speaker from the federal level is because actually this weekend they're doing one of those. So that it's important to keep that in mind this weekend. There's a lot of work being done on this across the state and across the country today. This is one of their designated weekends that they do this. So we're going to keep that in our minds and in our prayers as well. I'm here to share a little bit about an overview with regard to human trafficking, okay? For those of you who know a little bit more about this issue, I apologize. I hope that you can continue to learn through this first presentation. The goal of this is to go a little bit more and give you a sort of a bird's eye view and set the table for not only for Leslie's keynote, but for the other keynote in the workshops that you're going to hear a little bit more about today, okay? Got a clicker? I love these things. I first learned about the issue of human trafficking actually not in Michigan. I learned about it. We have a 3-week cross-cultural trip that we take every year. We go to Cambodia. Okay? Now I'm going to dispel this myth a little bit later. This doesn't just happen in Cambodia, but for me, that's how I found out. I'd known about human trafficking. I was a sociology major, went on to law school and some of these things. Spent a summer in Peru working on cases of domestic violence and sexual abuse with International Justice Mission. But nothing prepared me. You can read about this issue. You can see a documentary, but until it really confronts you, it takes it to a whole nother level. So we were in Phnom Penh in one of the red light districts. We were learning a little bit more about this issue because we were going to visit some anti-trafficking organizations the next day. And I was walking through what is used to be called the Buding or White Building. And an older gentleman grabbed my arm and told me that he had young girls that he could offer me for sex. And he told me how young they were, what services they provided, how cheap it was, and all this sort of thing. Now my out in those situations is always that I've got friends. I'm gonna go talk to my friends, they might be interested too, and we'll get back to you, right? But that experience sort of hit me really hard because you could read about stuff, it's just you don't have that level of familiarity with it until something like that happens, right? Or until a girl grabs your arm and starts stroking your arm and telling you about what she can do, and then all of a sudden, like my emotions are off completely, right? And so some of that stuff to me, I was planning on studying something different for my dissertation research and everything. Then this happens, and a group of our students come back. Corey and Gabby are back here. They're from one of those early Cambodia trips too. We come back, and pretty soon, they're showing me how this happens close to Jackson. Like, Nora, listen, we don't necessarily feel like we're gonna go back to Cambodia, but we're interested in what this looks like here. And so they started pulling up in one of our classrooms actually, and John's exactly right. My first thing wasn't like, holy cow, this happens in Jackson. It was like, wow, this didn't get caught by our firewall, and am I going to get fired, right? And so they start pulling up websites where sex tourists brag about hopping from Asian massage parlor to Asian massage parlor. And it's just clear as day, right, on those websites, okay? That got my attention a little bit more, and so this momentum sort of has been building and building and building over the last several years, as Representative Colley said. This isn't something that's been around for a long time, but just recently as the state and other agencies started to address it. Now, this presentation, it's an introduction to human trafficking. Okay, we're going to go through 5 major things. How do we define human trafficking? What are key elements in any case of human trafficking? Talk about some important conceptual distinctions. We'll talk about the magnitude of the problem, which Representative Colley addressed a little bit. And then we'll talk about some commonly held assumptions. Okay, one of which is it only happens over there. Okay? Or it only happens, as she mentioned, in Detroit, right? Because that's the only place where any of these social issues ever exist, right? Urban areas. I don't think so. First case of human trafficking in Michigan reported in the UP. Okay? My home county, Iosco County, northeast Lower Michigan, they had a case in rural LaGrange. Okay? In the middle of, a lot of you don't even know where that is, right? But that's one of the kind of assumptions, okay? All right, there's gonna be a quiz on this later. It's part of the survey. So you gotta memorize. No, you don't have to at all. I'm gonna boil this down a little bit, okay? Oxford English Dictionary, to carry on trade, to buy and sell, have commercial dealings with anyone, bargain or deal for a commodity. The only word that I would remember if I were you there is commodity. People are being bought and sold. Okay? People are being bought and sold as commodities. Okay? Just like we would go and purchase a textbook. Okay? Or we would go fill our tank with gas. Okay? People are able to go and buy and sell other people. Right? Trafficking is also associated with dealings considered improper to have dealings of illicit or secret character. So this isn't something where they're not always doing it out where people can see it. Okay, it's illicit, it's secret, it's hidden. Okay? So as far as it being hidden, sometimes we see overlap with other illegal activities, right? Whether that's drugs, right? Or arms, or things like that. So there's an overlap there, okay? The TVPA, this is the first federal piece of legislation to address human trafficking. Trafficking Victims Protection Act, I'll refer to it as the TVPA, okay? Sex trafficking, it outlines sex trafficking and labor trafficking, okay? This is the distinction. I don't always like this distinction because the majority of the resources and the attention go to sex trafficking. Very much do we ever consider or talk about labor, right? Now here today we've got some folks that we're talking about it. We're talking about how we can make decisions to support fair labor practices, right? And so we're gonna try to talk about that as much as sex trafficking, even though a lot of funding and resources go to sex trafficking. Three major elements you gotta remember with regard to sex trafficking or labor trafficking are force, fraud, or coercion. And it's an or, it's not an and. So you only have to show one of the three. And for minors, there's no burden of proof whatsoever. So for minors, there doesn't need to be sort of this burden to show force. Okay? If there's a transaction going on that deals with commercial sexual exploitation, that's human trafficking. Okay? For non-minors, okay, and this depends on the jurisdiction you're in, for non-minors, you have to show one of those three. Okay? As well as there is a commercial sexual transaction. As for some sort of consideration, which is something of value, okay? Dubious distinction between sex and labor. Forgive my alliteration. I don't know what I was thinking of dubious distinction, but the distinction here is tricky. Because everyone wants to sort of get behind this idea of sex trafficking because mostly it's a young girl has been victimized by someone who's significantly older than her, right? To all of us, that's sort of morally and ethically abhorrent, right? But we don't necessarily want to focus on the fact that some of our supply chains and what we buy on a day-to-day basis are also implicate trafficking, right? So the chocolate bar that we buy, right, that's made because young kids in West Africa, right, are being taken advantage of. But we think what? Well, we got this great deal, right? Well, to what extent does our great deal come from someone else losing out, right? And how do our morals and our ethics and our values line up with those sorts of decisions? So we've got to think more about that. The distinction between trafficking and smuggling, I like to tell this story. John, you probably remember this. When I was doing my dissertation defense, and I'm up there and they tell me, you've got to defend this, you've got to defend this, and do whatever, you know. So I got this lady, and she's like a JD, PhD, so I know she's coming after me about something. Like, I know she's going to come in. I just don't know what it's going to be yet, right? It's like this academic hazing process. It's wonderful. So I get up there and I defend, and she raises her hand, and I'm like, okay, it's on. You know, it's on. We're gonna argue, debate. I'm excited because like she's been to law school, I've been to law school. We can argue about it, then we can walk away from it. In academia, like people always get offended, and anyway. So she's out there, and she's like, she says, why doesn't your dissertation have anything about smuggling? I was like, well, it's because it's about trafficking. So we're talking about trafficking. You don't need to worry about smuggling. And she picks up this book. It was the book from our class. She's like, do you want me to tell you what smuggling is? I don't think you know what it is. And I was like, really? I didn't say really, but in my mind. I said, the difference between smuggling and trafficking is consent. So an individual who's raised in rural Mexico, okay, who can no longer farm, corn, Because it's cheaper for Mexicans to buy corn that's imported from the United States than it is to buy corn that's grown in Mexico, he's no longer got a job. He gets pushed off his property. What does he do? He wants to farm where? In the United States. It's funny how that works. Okay? He wants to farm in the United States. He talks to someone who he knows can help smuggle someone along. Okay? It's consensual. Okay? They agree to certain terms. Back when I did my dissertation research, $4,000 to $5,000 to cross the border. You get 2 tries. I'm guessing it's going to be a little bit more than that now. Okay? But when you look at those costs, that puts them in a position, if they're trying to find work somewhere else, okay, he's in a tough position from a labor standpoint. He's saying, yeah, I want to be smuggled. The difference is, when that coyote or someone who's transporting him changes up the terms, and there's some sort of force, fraud, or coercion, then it becomes trafficking. Okay? So when it goes from consent to non-consent, you've seen in the news recently, right? San Antonio, all those people packed in the back of a flatbed, 110, 120 degree temperatures. Some of them died, some of them were severely, severely hurt. Okay? That's trafficking. Okay? It's no longer smuggling. Nobody consents to being in the back of a trailer at 130 degrees or whatever, right? That's different, okay? Centrality of the terms force, fraud, or coercion. I'm going to attempt to explain these, but it's not easy to. Okay? It's not easy to explain these things because you've got to go back and look at examples of precedent, previous examples that have been tried in court. Force refers to physical or brute force used to compel an individual or group of individuals to act against his or her will. Physical or brute force. Okay? So beating someone up, using weapon. Okay? From a sex trafficking standpoint, okay, this is a young woman who's recently been introduced into the sex trafficking industry who gets beat up repeatedly or forcibly raped to subdue her to listen to the traffickers. Okay? Fraud. Process by which traffickers misrepresent truth or reality to their victims in order to keep them in bondage. No one will ever want to be with you again. Okay? If I fire you, no one else will want to hire you. Right? That could be the labor side. Okay? Misrepresentation of truth. And this is why this is really important. Okay? And this, we had a great talk with Kurt Hoffman last night that talked about the centrality of truth and understanding reality and so on and so forth. Some of the ways in which victims of human trafficking are stigmatized: prostitute, whore, slut, right? Illegal, okay? That works against us. And the reason why is because if people have this perception that everyone else dehumanizes them. Are they going to just go out and trust someone and share their story? Of course they're not. Okay? We have to be willing to cultivate an environment and an atmosphere of trust. That these people, they're treated as equals with us. Regardless of their citizenship status, regardless of what they've been through and whether or not they made the same decisions as you or believe the same thing as you. That's not important now. What's important is they feel like they can trust you. And you feel like you can validate them and who they are, okay? Coercion. Use of threats against family or other people or objects of value. So the victims will often say, you can do anything you want to me, but don't harm my family. So the traffickers, what they'll do, okay, you leave, and I will, I'll kill your mom, I'll kill your dad, I'll do this, I'll do that, and there are these threats that are made to keep them there, okay? Employers, if someone isn't documented, that can be a threat. Not to mention the fact that the employer's employing someone who isn't documented, which makes you think they could be held responsible too. But it's not always the case. We focus on the worker, okay? Important to understand the burden of proof for minors. We talked about this a little bit more. The burden of proof for minors, you don't have to show force, fraud, or coercion. You just have to show that commercial sexual transaction. Now, scope of the problem. Scope of the problem. As Brana mentioned earlier, it is very difficult to quantify these numbers, okay? We're dealing with hidden populations. So how do we just sort of spot on estimate what's going on? It's very difficult to do so, and these numbers are changing, okay? Bales estimates 27 million people in the world today. That number up to 35 in other more recent publications now too. How do we know 35? Has somebody gone around and counted the 35 million people? No. They've developed a methodology that helps them estimate that. Okay? So this is sort of give and take, right? ILO, 20.9 million forced laborers globally, up from 12.3. We know these numbers are going up. Okay, the ILO is International Labor Organization, which is a branch of the UN. Okay, 70% exploited by employers or private enterprises, 22% for commercial sexual exploitation, 68% for commercial labor. Bridget Carr over the University of Michigan Anti-Trafficking Law Clinic claims 8-to-1 the number of labor trafficking victims that they help work with versus sex trafficking. Yet all the money goes into the sex trafficking. Okay? So you gotta sort of figure that out. ILO, the average victim of human trafficking generates $13,000. You think $13,000, that's not that much money. I'm sorry, college students, that is a lot of money. Globally, however, $13,000 is a lot more in a developing country than it is in a developed country. So there's some, when you look at the average, it's gonna pull it down a little bit more, okay? Sheldon Zhang, who's a criminologist out at San Diego State, estimates the United States is the second largest destination country for those trafficking in the sex industry behind Germany. Part of that is demand. Okay, we talked about, Representative Colley talked about demand side. Demand is very, very important as far as this goes. Okay, demand side is very important because we talk a lot and do a lot of research on supply side. We've also got to think about, okay, how do we address the demand side too? Amy O'Neill, Richard, who's a CIA analyst, reports that 45 to 50,000 women and children trafficked annually in the United States, largely by crime rings and other criminal networks. Many of these women come from either Latin America, Southeast Asia, NIS, or Eastern Europe. NIS, for those of you that are from the area, not to be confused with MIS. I'm sorry, that's just a ridiculous joke. The NIS is newly independent states. So that's Central Asia, right? So any country that ends with a stan, right? Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and so on and so forth. So you have a number of those countries. Now, one of the things that's common with these countries is that oftentimes these networks exist through the guise of travel agencies, but they also exist as a result of some sort of war or conflict. You find a lot of individuals moving, sometimes through trafficking networks, in places like Afghanistan, Middle East, Eastern Europe. There's these already established sort of channels and networks, some of which is around some of these conflicts, right? All right, estimates of labor trafficking are few. This is actually why I did my research on migrant farm workers in West Michigan, was because we didn't have a lot of data about human trafficking on the labor side, right? So it's important for us to understand not only the sex trafficking side, but also the labor side. And so doing more research in that area is sort of where I headed. The car estimate I already gave you, about 8-to-1. Now, I was sat on a panel with one of the FBI agents from the Federal Task Force in East Michigan. And his observation was more, they see more victims of sex trafficking than they do labor. But I would argue to some extent that's because that's what they look for, okay? So if you're looking for sex trafficking victims and that's sort of what your mandate is, then that's sort of what you find. In West Michigan, the dynamic is a little bit different than East Michigan, too. I'm an East Sider myself. But at the same, you know that from the East side, when you look at Detroit, some of the dynamics for human trafficking are going to be much different than you'd find in West Michigan, which has a lot more migrant farm workers. The economy is much stronger, and so on and so forth, okay? There are a couple of different factors to that as well. Detroit Free Press estimates as many as 11 million undocumented workers in the United States annually, 150,000 in Michigan alone, especially in the summer months. Again, this is an estimate, but I will tell you this. From my research, as far as my dissertation went, the primary indicator for someone's vulnerability with regard to human trafficking if they're a migrant farm worker is social networks. Now, I don't think like, oh, you mean like Facebook account? Twitter? And Instagram? No, I mean social networks like in the sociology sense, like they know people. To what extent do they know people? Do they know someone who's worked there before? So they know which growers are going to take advantage of them and which ones aren't. Do they have family in the area that's worked there already? Are they connected to social service programs that can provide housing, that can provide health care, and so on and so forth? If they're more connected, they're more likely to not be trafficked because they have reference where they have people they can talk about this with, right? Churches. Okay? Churches are another good organization in terms of that social network. So those that are better connected in those ways are much less likely to be taken advantage of. Okay? Much less likely. Now the hard thing with that is if you talk to a migrant farm worker, especially those that are undocumented, the last thing they're going to do if they get hurt or sick is go into the clinic. Okay? The last thing they're going to do is go and seek out social services because they're concerned, because of these larger social stereotypes, that someone's going to say something about them. Okay? The same thing with some churches too. It's like instead of interacting with people on a humane level, on a one-to-one level, and saying, okay, we're both creating the image of God sort of thing, and sort of starting from there, it's sort of a talking down at people. And, how do they live their lives differently because I've got the way you should live, and I'm going to tell you, right? Instead of thinking about like, okay, this is a process for all of us, and how do we sort of work within that? We talked about terminology a little bit before. Terminology is very important because those cases of human trafficking that we've been able to partner with local agencies on, provide support for, they've been able to develop and foster trust with individuals where those individuals feel comfortable sharing with them. They feel like they're not going to be judged, they're not going to be looked down at, they're not going to be treated differently because somehow they've made choices or they're in a certain set of circumstances that aren't quote unquote socially acceptable. Okay? So developing that trust within your profession, and a lot of you are trained to do that, right? That's part of who you are, it's part of your training. How do I establish this trust with individuals? Okay, how do I understand, even though I may not have made some of the same decisions, how do I validate who they are? Okay? How do I validate who they are? Examples of human trafficking. Undocumented workers are not always victims of human trafficking, but they're at a much higher risk. So I talked about that a little bit already. And examples of human trafficking in Michigan. Let me just give you some examples from Jackson County. One of them from Jackson County came from the youth center. Okay? Called in, they had a young woman who had left home at 12 years old, met an older guy, and it's sort of a Romeo pimping situation. He sort of pulls her in and then leaves with her. Okay? He sort of promises her the world, takes all good care of her and everything, severs these relationships with her family members, whatever, sort of wedges himself in there as being the person for her. And then they leave for 2 years. She's gone. She's on the FBI's missing persons list. She's gone. Then he sort of turns her out in Detroit and makes all kinds of money. She comes back to Jackson. Okay, get a call saying, what do we do with this? And this is another thing to think about. How can you and your agency or your organization, what is your protocol? What does your protocol look like? What do you do if you have a suspected victim of human trafficking? Okay? We had a conversation, general, no specifics, okay, whatsoever. We started pointing in the direction of the Polaris Project hotline, which is on your materials on the left side of your folder. Okay? End up going through that hotline, FBI comes over, does the interview, and goes in front of the judge to advocate for that young woman. Now, in every one of these cases, is everything going to turn out sunshines and rainbows and little ponies? No. I mean, it really isn't. Okay? I'm sorry for those of you who like ponies. But the thing is, okay, I just got to throw a little bit of humor in because this stuff gets really heavy. But the thing is, it's like with some of how this works, there needs to be a process, but we've got to understand that the process or a protocol to report, but that this is a process. She may not decide right away to leave. You've got to still be there and be willing to support her or him through this, okay? Ingham County, head prosecuting attorney, right? Head prosecuting attorney. We can talk all we want about how we're making it tougher on these people. He served 1 year. Okay, he served 1 year. So we can talk about how legislature's getting tough on crime. And it's 15 years. But he served 1 year. And he's a head prosecuting attorney. He said he's all behind this anti-trafficking effort and whatever. And he served for 1 year. Okay? And he ran an operation with his brother, who was an attorney. So that kind of stuff. Anyway, I got it. Hold on. Lenawee County. Lenawee County. Okay, they did a raid on Spa Misty. Okay, found women in Spa Misty. that were part of an extensive, again, human network throughout the Midwest. Okay? Throughout the Midwest, they had bounced around Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan, and so on and so forth. Calhoun County had another grad who called, again, from a juvenile center. There was a young woman who was there who was complaining, said she wanted out of the life. He was one of the students here, and so he'd heard about human trafficking. He'd been to a couple of events across 94 corridor. He calls in and says, we need some support to know what to do with this. And I said, okay, can we talk? He's like, yeah, come over whenever. It was in the summertime. We sat down and we talked about the different scenarios. This was stepdad. Another commonly held assumption is somebody grabs someone they don't know and turns them out, pimps them out. Families do this to each other. Stepdad turns out his daughter, his wife's daughter. Okay? Stepdaughter. I'm sorry. A little bit slow on the uptake there. Matt's over there like. Anyway, turns her out and starts pimping her out. Okay. Also advertises her on Backpage. So they went online and were able to see her and work with Battle Creek PD to sort of address the case. Okay, we worked in terms of helping to refer her to an agency in Michigan, the NASA project that works with minor cases, minor victims, right? So these are examples in mid-Michigan. This doesn't just happen over there. It's happening here. Okay, and there are a number of other stories I could go through, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to. Human trafficking exists because well-meaning people refuse to believe it exists, okay? Well-meaning people refuse to believe it exists. So there are times where we like to think the best of other people, okay? We like to think, oh, that, it looks a lot like this, but yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't know, probably, it's fine. You don't know how many of those cases where people have doubted themselves and they say something and it is a case. It is a case of human trafficking. So I want to sort of point your attention to that Polaris Project hotline, okay? You can call and get counsel from them. Give them, and if you're a professional, give them a hypothetical. Don't sit there. Obviously, you've got to protect that plan, okay? You're not going to go and do anything per se right off the bat, but you can counsel with them and say, hey, here's some things that I'm looking for, that I've seen. What do you think? What's my next step here? Okay? I have people call me and ask me those questions. If I can't give you the answers, then I'll point you in the right direction to somebody who can. Okay? So feel free to call me, call the Human Trafficking Hotline, that Polaris Project Hotline, or whatever, but know that support is there. Law enforcement, whether it's at the local level, maybe not as much at the local level, but more at the federal level, state level, and federal level, they've always been very appreciative of the fact that they can't cover everything. They can't monitor everything. So having these tips from community members, concerned individuals, college students, whatever, college students, it goes a long way to help them. You don't know what they already know about a certain situation or case, right? Now you have to be careful. You got to be careful who you can trust, because sometimes and Representative Colley was very correct when she said a lot of, especially more local law enforcement, tend to not be as educated. They don't know as much about the issue. So we want to be able to get out there and train and do awareness raising and some of those things. But those that work with these issues, because they're so multi-jurisdictional, tend to be the ones at the federal and state level, okay? Because they're a little bit more versed and know sort of how this works. But that doesn't mean that a local sort of law enforcement or public safety officer can't also be looking as well, okay? Okay, just to review, and then I'll take a couple of minutes for questions, just in case you have any. Went over the definition of human trafficking, okay? We talked about the difference between sex and labor trafficking. We talked about some of the key elements necessary: force, fraud, or coercion, unless the individual is a minor, okay? And then you don't have to show force, fraud, or coercion. Talked about some conceptual distinctions between human smuggling and human trafficking. We talked about some distinctions between sex and labor trafficking. We talked about some of the distinctions within terminology and how we should approach these cases as well. We also addressed some of these commonly held assumptions, such as this happens over there and not here, or things like, this only happens, this only happens to people who don't know one another. It can't happen within families or things like that. The only other thing I would want to say with regard to this is, The purpose of this presentation, like we're not here, Aaron, myself, Leslie, Jane, the workshops, the vendors, we're not here to scare people. An underlying motivating factor, we don't want fear to be a motivating factor. We want you to be more aware of this, okay? We want you to be more aware of this so you can go and see, look for some of these things. Look for some of these indicators and so on and so forth, and ask more questions. Okay, reach out to some of the support services that are already there. Nobody wants you to leave here and fear that behind the oak tree somebody's waiting to grab you. Okay, that's a bit extreme, right? So I'm going to take a minute for any questions, and then we'll transition, give you a little bit of a short break, and then welcome Leslie King. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
When you were talking about the TVPA,
Yep.
that as far as sentencing goes per jurisdiction, is that federal district? And
That's a federal statute. So at the federal level, what the University of Michigan Law Clinic does is they help victims of human trafficking who are willing to testify against the trafficker. There's services provided at a federal level through that statute. Okay? Does that answer your question?
kind of, but just if the judge with sentencing, how do they decide if it's per district, if it's a federal law, then how, when you said different jurisdictions, is that what you meant?
When I meant differing jurisdictions, I sort of mean, so jurisdiction is going to depend on where the crime occurs. So if it's, but it tends to be broader with these.
Okay, and that's where the.
Right, that's where federal can come in. So it depends on the specific situation. So, for example, we had a former social work student who was working with DHS, he was doing a DHS internship. And there's a man who, ironically enough, he had been on the Cambodia trip. There's a man who had met a woman from Cambodia, married her, they had kids, and he turned them out. So that's federal, because they're but some of them are a little bit more localized jurisdiction-wise, it just depends. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, sorry.
Any chance of getting a copy of your policy?
Yeah, for sure. If you want to email me, I should be able to send that out or send you a hard copy or something along those lines.
Okay, and maybe just a small fear, coercion, and
Yep.
fraud.
Force, fraud, coercion.
So it seemed like fraud was really force and coercion in a sense. And I would see fraud as kind of a switch and bait, right?
Bait,
Promise,
can be.
bait,
Yep.
switch. Promise one thing,
Yep.
it's a trap, and then
Right.
actually do violence.
So one of the cases with fraud can be an individual promising a certain type of work or certain types of work conditions. And then really when that worker, we see this with labor trafficking, there's some sort of agreement come to, but then the migrant farm worker spends a lot of money getting there, only to find that the conditions aren't what were promised. Taking away passports, yeah. Yeah, that's one of the huge indicators is someone who doesn't have possession of their personal effects. So driver's license, passports, other sort of personal items that you think that you would carry, right? I mean, so people just that don't have those things, it's sort of an indicator. It's not a for sure, but it's definitely sort of a red flag. Yep. Other questions over here?
So I live in England County, I used to work for the state police. So I worked with Stewart Guns.
Great. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So, and that was interesting that he's in a political position. So then my question is, it kind of went along with, did I understand that stepdad came to you to get information and then, so he knew how to, you know, how to get the stepdad, stepdaughter?
Calhoun County?
Yes.
No, the stepdaughter was in juvie. She confides in someone. Stepdad had pimped her out and
That's okay.
posted her online and all that kind of
But
stuff.
didn't he come to you and ask?
Stepdad.
Oh, I thought he met with you. Okay. I must have-
No, I'm sorry, this is one of the juvenile detention workers.
Okay.
Got a
I
hold of you.
misunderstood that. I thought maybe you had people that come to you so they knew how to get around.
I might not have been clear either.
Okay.
So that's-
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Have you ever had that happen? I'm sorry, that come to you to meet you to find out how to get around the laws or come
No.
to these? Okay.
I mean, not that I'm aware of. I've done some presentations where there have been people there, that I don't know if you've ever been around someone, you just don't get a good vibe about what's going on. It's like somebody sitting in a presentation, especially in Jackson actually. You know, we had a couple city council members for years that frequented massage parlors. And so we couldn't get an ordinance passed to regulate the massage parlors because there are two people on city council. So the positions of power thing is really important with all this. Yep.
I was walking down the street and on my way to meet a friend for lunch.
Yep.
And I walked down the block, following these two darling girls. And as I'm watching them, I'm thinking, oh, anyway,
Yep.
we come to a stoplight and I'm looking at them and thinking, they don't look like students, and then I'm studying them and thinking, oh, they're not students. And the more I looked, the more I thought they were trafficked girls. And the light changed and we walked down another couple blocks and I'm following them very closely and I'm thinking, what should I do? Where do I go with this? And then I noticed this gentleman in front of him is a big guy and he's watching the two girls through the windows, the shop windows. He keeps glancing back and so he slows down, the girls slow down, and so I slow down. And then he speeded up a little, and the girls speeded up a little, and I speeded up a little. And so,
I see a pattern.
I felt sure they were trafficked. The dress, everything, and they were at the most 14, 15, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, it wasn't like I could call a number or somebody and talk to somebody about what should I do.
Well, now you can, right?
You can call this number?
Yep, you can call that number and say, here, this is what I'm seeing. Can you give me a little bit more of an idea? Is this something I should? And here's the deal. With any of these phenomena, this isn't something where you just like look and after 5 minutes this is traffic. So you've got to be like, with some of the work that we did with the Asian massage parlor, I mean, that took hours and hours and hours of, quite honestly, much to the chagrin of the Jackson PD, surveilling massage parlors. So, you know, we kind of, so what I would do is I would say, hey, is there a coffee shop across the street? Go get a coffee, sit by the window, and just watch and see what happens. Don't put yourself in a position where you're trying to intervene. A lot of these times, we're talking about organized crime here. So they're not like, you know, we had and again, very well-intentioned people, church group. We're gonna go pray for the massage parlor, in the massage parlor parking lot. Don't do that. Okay, now I know God is powerful and all this kind of stuff, but like, you know, they have muscle that comes in and they'll run you out of there if you don't belong there. So we've got to be able to, you know, in the massage parlor parking lot. Don't do that. Okay, now I know God is powerful and all this kind of stuff, but like, you know, they have muscle that comes in and they'll run you out of there if you don't belong there. So we've got to be able to, you know, in doing more research, it helps us better understand what these things look like. So you have a reference point now, so you can call, but also you can go somewhere and observe it for a little bit longer. Have better answers. Yeah.
Given the current political environment, is there any protections available for undocumented victims to come forward?
Yeah, so in your packet, Farm Worker Legal Services, over in Kalamazoo area, there are a number of networks, especially in West Michigan, where you have attorneys and others who can advocate on behalf of, and this is one of our big struggles. Because in Jackson, I mean, we do this all the time. We go in and we round up workers that are undocumented. We deport them. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry now, people. Okay? We deport them. We don't ask questions. We don't see if there's something deeper going on here. So we need to be able to transform that conversation and say, okay, how do we institute or implement some of these different ways that we can screen here for this? So that's part of the conversation sort of moving forward, although that's quite dependent upon where we're at politically. So, yeah. Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. Matt's got a question. Might keep up right over here. Sorry.
Actually, to the point that Sue was bringing up,
Yep.
I actually called Claris on a situation like that. And the advice they gave is if it's a minor, you can call the local authorities and they'll do what's called a welfare check. They said that's their first response to the situation that's unfolding before you, if it's a minor. And the police will come in and at least try to identify, is there a relationship between you and this man? The situation I saw was at least a 10-year difference in age. So that's the advice they gave me, at least in that type of thing.
And if nothing happens, like email someone, and because there are other states, like the federal level, they're much more aware and sort of attuned to this now than they have been in the past. So if nothing works on the local level, because I know in Ann Arbor area, they've had struggles working with local, but federal has been more responsive to it. So, anyway, there's one last question, and then we need to take a break before Leslie comes in. Yep. How can you feel safe while all this is going on? I think the same way you felt safe when you didn't know about it. I mean, other than you're aware, but there's a lot of stuff going on. We just need to, I think we need, in being aware, we know what to look for. But that doesn't mean that, I don't know that that necessarily means that someone's always there trying to. You really, when we look at the number one recruiting tool and mechanism is online. So communicating online with people, you've got to have boundaries. You've got to know what, you don't want to put too much of who you are and where and all that kind of stuff out there. And I think those sorts of things we've got to be really careful about. And I think, I would say, 20, 21 years old, you've not been approached at this point. So it's not like there are people out there trying to recruit all the time. I think we're safe. We just need to be aware of it, right? It's not, again, not trying to scare anybody or anything like that. Just be aware and know where your boundaries are, and know how to have healthy conversations with people about disclosing too much, because there are methods where pimps will